Hi, I'm Chris Norman, also known as Nose. I'm the co-author of the GURPS Game Aid for Foundry, and this is the next video in my Learning GURPS series, Combat. Let me define some specifics about GURPS Combat and how it differs from D&D. And then I'll discuss how you can start with a simple version of Combat, and then add rules until you reach the level of complexity that you desire. First, GURPS Combat rounds are 1 second long. Yep. You won't be able to run across the room, switch weapons, stab someone in the gut, and then take a bonus action to drink a potion. I'm joking, of course. I don't actually know if D&D allows you to do that in a single round, but I know that GURPS does not. In GURPS, each round, the player chooses a maneuver. This is the 1 second action that their character can take that turn, but more on maneuvers later. The next thing, there's no initiative in GURPS. Well, there is, but it refers to when both sides are surprised. What D&D calls initiative order, GURPS calls turn order, and it's fixed. Turn order is determined by the character's basic speed value. While you might mourn the loss of the random order offered by rolling dice, there are some advantages. Mainly, each turn we always know who goes next. In fact, my current gaming group usually sits in turn order sequence around the table, so we just go clockwise. Originally it happened by chance, but we keep it that way because it helps. And the concept of turn order makes sense in GURPS because you're building your character. You can pay points to increase your speed, and hence your chance of going earlier in the round. But more on that in the character video. Hit points. In 1974, Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax came up with the concept of hit points for their groundbreaking game Dungeons & Dragons. That game concept is still in use today, and in D&D 5e, hit points represent a combination of the physical damage that the flesh can take, and the exertion as you're dodging out of the way of an attack, and your skill at knowing best how to minimize that damage. You know that when you go up a level and gain 10 hit points, your character isn't packing on 10 more points of flesh. That most likely represents the character's increase in skill. But don't get me wrong, it's a great concept. I just point this out to show you how GURPS differs. GURPS also has hit points, but they only represent the physical damage that the body can take. GURPS uses fatigue points to represent the character's exhaustion level. And as I mentioned in the game mechanics video, where each attack is a dance between the attacker and defender, in GURPS, 2 of the 3 types of active defenses are skill-based, which means you can train them to get better. Also, in GURPS, you don't die when you get to 0 hit points. Instead, the character has to start making success rolls versus their health. First to see if they can remain conscious, and then to see if they can remain alive. It is possible for a valiant character to continue the battle even as they sink deeper and deeper into negative hit points. If they don't fail the various health rolls, they can remain alive until -5 times their maximum hit points. It does lead to some cinematic battles, as your brave commander hangs on to consciousness long enough to deliver the final fatal blow? And yes, this happened to one of my characters, and it was epic! By the way, we usually have all NPCs just die at 0 hit points. Unless they're special, no need to keep track of all that stuff for general NPCs. I mean, they aren't the heroes, your characters are. Also in GURPS, there's no such thing as armor class. Armor just provides damage resistance, which is a fancy way of saying that you subtract the armor value from the damage and only apply the difference, whatever gets through the armor. But because of all this, many people say that GURPS Combat is more deadly. And they are right, sort of. GURPS tries to be a close simulation of reality. Many people love GURPS because it can offer that gritty reality experience. Sean Punch, the line editor of GURPS, once posted that, if you wouldn't do it in reality, don't do it in GURPS. Of course, as the GM, you can decide which rules you want to use, and there are more cinematic rules, but in general, GURPS Combat can be more lethal. Let me show you some numbers for comparison. Take a D&D 5e character with 35 hit points, and they're attacked by a spear-wielding goblin. The goblin rolls a critical hit and does 12 points of damage total. The D&D character would have 23 hit points left, close to 2/3 of their maximum, and it doesn't really matter whether they're nude or wearing plate armor. Now let's take a decent fighter-type character in GURPS, which would have, say, 15 hit points. Hit points are calculated based on your attributes and do not normally go up. You can buy them up, but only to 130% of the original, representing getting as buff as possible. So let's do that, and now the fighter type has 19 hit points. The goblin makes a critical hit to the guts and does 12 points of damage. In GURPS, being nude versus being in armor does matter, so the nude version would take 12 points of damage, with 7 left, about 1/3. The armored version would fare a little bit better and only suffer 6 points of damage. The plate armor has a damage resistance value of 6, about 2/3 their maximum. But as the D&D character gains levels, the goblin becomes less and less of a threat. The GURPS character is already at their maximum hit points, so no matter how experienced they become, the goblin will always be trouble. So, if your players are expecting to wade into a room of low-level creatures and just slaughter them all, they have to be aware that one of those poor little creatures might reach out and get lucky. Again, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say one system is better than the other. I'm just trying to warn you that GURPS Combat has some fundamental differences from D&D. To sum it up, combat rounds are 1 second long, players choose a maneuver each round, turn order is fixed, GURPS hit points only represent physical damage, and armor class doesn't exist. Now this can be a turnoff for some people. If you or your players don't like this, then GURPS may not be the game for you. But if you're willing to investigate further, you might come to like the breadth of options and tactical decisions that you can make while playing GURPS. Maneuvers. This is where we can customize combat from simple to gritty reality. Each round, the active player chooses a combat maneuver for their character. There's a whole list of combat maneuvers, and my suggestion is to start small and then add in more as they become more familiar. Remember, this is just a suggestion. The whole idea is to show you that GURPS Combat can be easy to play and yet offer complex tactical decisions. Out of all the maneuvers, we'll start with Ready, Concentrate, Move, Attack, and Aim. That's it. The Ready maneuver is basically the 1-second utility action. You can use it to ready your weapon or grab a potion from your potion belt or pick up your shield. Whatever the GM decides is reasonable for 1 second. You would use the Concentrate maneuver when casting spells or using superpowers that require concentration. The difference between this and the Ready maneuver is that if you are attacked while concentrating, you'll need to make a success roll versus your willpower to maintain the concentration. A useful tactic against enemy spellcasters. The Move maneuver allows your character to move up to X number of hex, yards, meters, based on the character's basic move value. They're all basically the same. The Attack maneuver allows you to take a step, which is move 1 hex, yard, meter, and then roll an attack skill, assuming you're standing within range of an opponent. If you succeed, then your opponent gets to roll a defense. There are 3 active defenses: dodge, parry, and block. But to start out, you could just use dodge. You don't need to worry about the rest. However, if you use one of the character creation tools, these values are calculated for you, so it's not hard to use them. And then finally, the Aim maneuver. When attacking with a ranged weapon, one of the modifiers that I suggest adding is for the range. It just makes sense. It's harder to hit something when it's farther away. You add the range modifier to your attack calculation to see if you would hit. The GURPS Basic set has the default range table. But the Monster Hunters 2 supplement offers a more cinematic range table, which I prefer, but either works. This is where Aim comes in. All ranged weapons have an accuracy number, which can be added to the calculation to help offset the negative range modifier. Here's an example. An archer is aiming at a target that's 7 hexes, yards, meters away. Using either range table, this would be a -3 to the attack. If the archer is using a longbow that has an accuracy of 4, then an aim maneuver will give them +4, for a total of +1. So this archer can attempt to hit the target 7 yards away with a +1 modifier, assuming they take 1 round to just aim, and then shoot the second round. It's a fair trade-off for the fact that someone who's shooting a ranged weapon is usually not being attacked. And that's a good start for maneuvers. Let's add a few more things like modifiers for defense. Being attacked from the side normally gives you a -2 to the defense, and being attacked from the back gives you a -4. If you use these modifiers in your combat, then your players can simulate the D&D 5e flanked position. It's not exactly the same, but they're similar in that it gives your players incentive to try to maneuver their characters into the right positions. And there you have it. You can create a really nice combat with just those maneuvers and those 2 defense modifiers. Done. Of course, it's a little stilted because you have to move and then attack next round. Well, we can add another maneuver. Remember, however, to do this in stages. Each of these stages is logical, but presented to a brand new player, it could become overwhelming. That being said, you've been warned. The next thing I would add is the maneuver called Move and Attack, which is an unfortunate name, so we nicknamed it the Charge Attack, and you'll see why in a bit. What the Charge Attack does is it allows you to move your full movement and attack instead of just 1 step, but you must attack at a -4 to hit, and no matter what value you come up with, your effective skill maxes out at 9. But now your characters can race into combat and haphazardly attack their opponent. Now that you have the charge attack maneuver, you could introduce another thing, extra effort. Extra effort are modifiers that you can add in certain situations that cost fatigue points. We haven't really talked about fatigue points yet because there really has been no use for them, except now. Our group routinely uses 3 of these extra effort modifiers. Heroic Charge. Pay 1 fatigue point while performing a charge attack maneuver. This is why we renamed it from Move and Attack. And if you do so, you don't suffer the -4 to hit, nor the maximum skill value of 9. Now your players can charge across the room and stab anybody they want. But only so many times, because fatigue is now another resource that the players must manage. Personally, I think it's a great level of complexity to add. Instead of just being one big bag of hit points, you now have to manage hit points that characterize physical damage and fatigue points that characterize enemy usage. Enemy? Energy. Feverish Defense. Pay 1 fatigue point before attempting an active defense, dodge or parry or block, and get a +2 modifier. A really useful trick if you're about to get skewered. Mighty Blow. Pay 1 fatigue point before rolling damage and add 2 more points of damage. Easy. Okay, right there you have a decent amount of complexity which can make a very interesting tactical combat, as your players have to manage their hit points and fatigue points, and hopefully it's not too many rules. Of course, you can add more. Are you ready for the next level? I call this the hurry up and wait stage. All-out attack, which has 4 variations: determined, strong, double, and feint, although we don't seem to use feint much. All-out attack strong is nice because it gives you the added damage, just like the Mighty Blow extra effort does, but without the cost of the fatigue. All-out attack determined is good if you're having problems hitting. All-out attack double is 2 attacks, think possible double damage. But the downside to all of the all-out attacks is that you get no defense. Until your next turn, you cannot actively defend against an attack. Which means if an opponent attacks you and they succeed their attack roll, you get no defense roll and must take the damage. Seem crazy, right? Well, it gives you yet another thing to think about. Is your opponent focused on another target and maybe not thinking about you? Could you use the double attack or the strong attack to do enough damage to incapacitate them before they have a chance to hit you? This is another level of complexity for your players. It's a gamble. Would it be worth it? It does make the combat a little more interesting. We'll also add all-out defense, which can either be a +2 to 1 defense roll, or allow you to roll 2 different defenses, like parry and dodge. We call this the "oh shit" maneuver. You're basically trying to stay alive and hope that your party can save you. And then finally, the wait maneuver. This is simple enough. You specify some event, and if that event occurs before the start of your next turn, you can perform the response. But you need to specify the event and the response up front, like, I'll make an all-out attack strong if someone steps within range, or I'll pull this rope if I see any orcs. With this, you can simulate D&D's attacks of opportunity, plus other things, but your players need to make the choice. Do I do a charge attack now and spend my last fatigue point to make a heroic charge, or do I wait? And if they come in range, can I spend my last fatigue point on an all-out attack with Mighty Blow? That should be enough, right? Combats can be pretty complex with these rules. But if you're looking to add more, Add change posture. GURPS understands 3 basic postures: standing up, kneeling or sitting, or lying on the ground or prone. And they each have modifiers to attack and defense based on what posture you're in. If you start to care about posture, then it can be effective in combat. In GURPS, it takes 2 rounds to effectively go from prone to standing. So if you're able to knock an opponent to the ground, then they're a lot less effective as they spend a round or 2 trying to get back up. It introduces new combat tactics. Instead of trying to hammer the bad guy in the plate mail, what if you just trip him up and knock him over? And once you've added posture, you could add the active defense called dive, which they should have named hit the dirt, which is dodge +3 against ranged attacks, but you must end up prone. Or instead, you could add the maneuver deceptive attack. This allows you to trade some of your attack skill to reduce the defense roll of the opponent. So for every -2 you take to your attack skill, the defender takes a -1 to their defense skill. The martial arts supplement has a similar version for ranged attacks called predictive shots or leading the target. It's basically the same math. For every -2 you take to your attack, the defender gets a -1 to their dodge. That's basically the level of combat maneuvers that we use in our regular GURPS campaign. Occasionally we pull out some of the more esoteric maneuvers, but 99% of the time we stick with what's above. But there's still more complexity you can add to combat. Yeah, right, like you need to add more complexity. It turns out the various different damage types, like cutting or crushing or impaling or piercing, have different wounding multipliers. This means that once the damage gets past the DR, the damage resistance, the armor, whatever is left over is multiplied by the wounding multiplier, rounded down, and then applied. Crushing has a wounding multiplier of 1, which means that any damage that gets past armor is just multiplied by 1. No big deal. But cutting has a wounding multiplier of 1.5. So if you do 4 points of cutting damage, and the opponent has damage resistance of 2, then 2 points of damage make it through the armor, multiplied by 1.5, and that gives you 3 points of damage. Given our original hit point example, the GURPS fighter type with 19 hit points and the goblin with the spear, the goblin makes a critical hit to the guts, doing 12 points of damage. The nude GURPS character would take 12 points of damage, but since it's to the gut, also known as the vitals, any impaling damage that gets past armor is now multiplied by 3. This is the wounding multiplier based on location. So the nude version would suffer 36 points of damage and be at a -17. Ouch. The armored version would fare a little better and only suffer 18 points of damage. The plate armor has a DR value of 6. But they'd still be down to 1 hit point. Okay, a few things here. First, you don't have to use all these rules. A lot of people don't use the wound multiplier or wound multipliers by location rules just because they don't want to have to do more math. It's not hard math, but if you don't like to figure out 9 minus 3 times 1.5 equals 9 on the fly, then be wary. Or keep a calculator nearby, or a cheat sheet like this. Or play your combat sessions in our GURPS Game Aid for Foundry, where our damage calculator does all this math for you. Secondly, it turns out that having combat be more lethal also makes the combat more memorable. There are no easy combats in GURPS. There's always a chance that someone might shoot an arrow in your eye and explode your brain, no matter how high a level you are. Which actually happened in a game I was running. The characters were battling a giant crocodile, and I was pretty certain I was going to be able to eat a few of them, when Jules's archer aimed for the crocodile's eye, rolled a critical hit and near maximum damage, and basically exploded its head. Combat over, and the cheering erupted. Okay, that's enough. I know we were well past the complexity boundary of most new GMs. In the link in the description is a Google Doc of our combat cheat sheet, which we print out in color, double-sided, and then laminate it and hand it out to everybody. It has more than what's been discussed in this video, and I wouldn't use it yet, at least not to start. Start small and add in what you feel comfortable with. You can have very exciting combats just using the first few stages that I've described. I think the biggest change for a D&D player is that rounds are just 1 second. To reasonably find a potion in a pouch, open it, and drink it would be 3 ready actions. Yes, 3 whole rounds. Finally, if you've made it this far, I suggest giving GURPS Combat a chance. As an avid board gamer and RPG gamer, I love to make GURPS Combat very tactical. It rivals most of the board games that I own, and then has the added layer of the RPG on top. But of course, you can choose any stage that works for you and your players. It's all GURPS, your way. And as always, thank you for watching.